a ir a ver el Templo de Karnak.
¿Listos?
And if you pass the questions, it means your trip will be for free. I'm joking, of course. Don't record that, I'm joking. So, my friends, here in Luxor we have the East Bank and the West Bank. But before that, Luxor is a beautiful city. In Luxor you can see a lot of monuments like Valley of the Kings, Valley of the Queens, Karnak Temple, Luxor Temple, Mummification Museum, Luxor, a lot of things. In Luxor we have the East side and the West side. In the East side there is Karnak Temple, Luxor Temple, Mummification Museum and Luxor Museum. That's all in the East Bank. Okay? In the West Bank, Valley of the Kings, Valley of the Queens, Valley of the Nobles, Valley of the Artists, the Queen Egyptian Temple, the Temple of the King City First.
Bienvenidos al Templo de Karnak.
Here, that's to receive the boats. That's a big one, not a small one, of course. Okay, that's to build or to use the stones to build the temple. Okay, and after that, there was two sandstone obelisks. One here and the other one put there. But now the other one in Cairo Museum. You're gonna see that in Cairo Museum when you visit. Okay, these two obelisks made of sandstone. Tomorrow we will talking about the stones because Luxor very rich about the stones. But the most famous stone here in Luxor is the alabaster one, alabaster stone. If you heard about that.
Yes.
But also we have a limestone, we have a granite stone, sandstone, basalt stone, a lot of stones. But the most famous one is the alabaster one. Tomorrow you're gonna see the stones. Okay. And after that you can see the Avenue of Sphinx or the Road of Sphinx or Rams. It's constructed by the King Ramses II. Ramses number 2. The ancient Egyptian history consists of 11 kings called by the name of Ramses. There are 11 kings called by the name of Ramses, but the most famous one, Ramses II, Ramses III. Okay? So the body of lion, the symbol of power, and the head of ram, one of the god Amon Ra symbols. You can see the big pylon. It's constructed by the king Nechtenebu. His name is Nechtenebu. By the way, each king had two names. The royal name and the coronation name. So choose one of the kings, any king you know. Okay. You choose.
Ramses.
Ramses, okay. Ramses II, his name is Usir Ma'at Ra Sitib in Ra. This is the coronation name of King Ramses II. Usir Ma'at Ra Sitib in Ra. Okay, so in the front you can see the big pylon. It's constructed by the king Nechtenebu. Behind the pylon you can see the mud brick building. It's made of mud brick. Can you tell me why the mud brick building exists here? Do you have any idea about that?
No.
To support? No.
No idea.
To build.
Yeah, exactly. They use the mud brick building as a stairs to build the pylons. Tomb of the king Tutankhamun, the only tomb was discovered intact in 1922. If you heard about the English archaeologist, his name is Warlett Carter.
Yes.
He discovered the tomb of the king Tutankhamun in 1922. Why is so famous? Call it by the name by the builder of Egypt. He had built a lot of temples in all of Egypt. Here on the east side, on the west side, even in Sudan. Sudan it was a part of Egypt in the Old Kingdom, in the time of the King III, in the time of the King II, it was a part of Egypt. Okay, so in Sudan there are a lot of monuments, like a pyramids, but small pyramids, not very huge, like in Saqqara or in Giza. Okay, the King Ramses II, he had 64 wives.
64?
Wives.
Okay.
The symbol of fertility here in Egypt. And 102 son and daughter, you can imagine that.
Only 3.
Inside this hall, there are 134 columns, okay, constructed by two kings. The king, City First, and his son. Guess who?
Ramses.
Exactly, Ramses II. Yes, he's right.
Okay.
It doesn't matter to be Ramses I or the father of the king, Ramses II, or the grandfather of the king, Ramses III. No, like I told you, each king had two names, the real name and the coronation name. How we can know that? For example, how we can know this temple or this column constructed by the king Ramses II? How we can know that?
Because the architecture, the signs, the
No.
The
For
symbols.
example, how I know you? From your ID,
Okay.
right?
Yes.
Exactly the same. In front of you, you can see two cartouches. How look?
Okay.
Two cartouches. One and two.
This is the
names.
ID.
The ID. The names of the King Ramses II.
Okay.
Ramses Mir Emin in one, and the second one hold Usir Ma'at Ra Sitim in Ra.
Okay.
You get it? And here also you can see a little bit of remains of the colors. But tomorrow in Valley of the Kings or inside the tombs, you're gonna see amazing colors. Okay, that's because of the stones. We have some stones can observe the colors for 100 and 1,000 years, but also there are some stones couldn't observe the colors. This made of sandstone. The sandstone couldn't observe the colors for look like 1,000 and 1,000 years, but you can see a little bit of the colors. But Valley of the Kings or the tombs digging inside limestone mountains. So tomorrow you're gonna see amazing colors inside. Names or only the kings, they can put their names inside the cartouche. Imagine with me, the cartouche in the beginning, it was the sun disk. Imagine your name inside the sun disk. So your name inside the god Amun-Ra himself. So you guarantee the stability and happiness. You get it? But the sun disk, it was so small to carry the name of the king. So they make it something like a stretching, and it's give us this form called cartouche. The obelisk, it's a sign for the temple. And the old time, okay, the obelisk, by the way, must be one block. One block.
One piece.
One piece.
Yes.
As you see, one piece from the granite stone. One piece of granite. Okay? And in the old time, they coat the body, or they covered the body of the obelisk by electrum. Electrum, it's a mix between silver and gold. If you mix it together, if you mix the silver and gold, it will give you electrum. This is the body of the obelisk. But the top of the obelisk, they coated by gold. So imagine when the sunrise, okay, touch the obelisk from very far away, you can see the obelisk. Or it will be like shiny one, a shiny point from very far away. The reflection of the sun. Reflection of the sun. It exists in Aswan. It's 300 kilometers far away from here. So they bring it from Aswan. You can imagine that.
Okay.
How come?
Imagínate.
How they transfer the obelisks from Aswan?
The big boats.
Exactly, the big boats. They use the boats, but not in any time in the flooding time of the river Nile. The flooding time, you know?
The boat
Not in any time. In the flooding time, when the river, when the water of the river very high. You see, when you come to Egypt, they try to get the title of, they want to be the pharaoh of Egypt. So he built a lot of things. Look like in Luxor temples, there is a chapel constructed by the king Alexander the Great. Okay, but this one constructed by the king Philip Aridos. Philip Aridos was the half brother to the king Alexander the Great. He made it for the adoration of two gods. The god Amun-Ra and the god Amun-Min. The god Amun-Ra, the main god, or the god of the capital. But the god Amun-Min was the god of fertility. You can see the boat, right?
Yes.
This is the boat, and inside the boat there is something like a small room, hold the golden statue. They used the holy lake for the purification. In the old time, to make a purification for the statue, you have three kind of purification. The purification by water, the purification by incense, and the purification by essence. They take the holy water from the holy lake to make the purification for the statues. Only the high priest or the king can do that.
Del tamaño de la pata de Ro.
Pero este se me hace que ya era de la última dinastía, que ya eran de nuestro tamaño. Porque mira,
Que ya eran chiquitines.
compara con este.
Sí, porque ve estos monitos. ¿Qué onda con el tamaño?
Qué impresión.
Cuidado, tenga los pies de este tamaño. Pobrecitos.
Sí, esta ya no aguantó la cara, ve.
Pero porque ¿en qué momento las caras se les empiezan a hacer así? Que los deterioran.